So, Halloween is over by a couple of weeks, but, it's still before the big Christmas explosion, however big it is this year. And there are so many good Halloween-type stories out there to be told that I just thought I'd extend the season a little bit. Especially since this one that I'm looking at is a hell of a story. It's titled That Hellbound Train, and it was written by the pretty well-known author and screenwriter Robert Bloch. Now, Robert Bloch was the author of the original novel Psycho, and we all know where that went when Alfred Hitchcock got a hold of it. This story is in a capsule description, basically another retelling of The Devil's Bargain. And it's got a very, very clever way of restating the old cautionary tale not to make deals with Old Scratch. So, That Hellbound Train by Robert Bloch. When Martin was a little boy, his daddy was a railroad man. Daddy never rode the high iron, but he walked the tracks for the CB&Q, and he was proud of his job. And every night, when he got drunk, he sang this old song about that hell-bound train. Martin didn't quite remember any of the words, but he couldn't forget the way his daddy sang them out. And when Daddy made the mistake of getting drunk in the afternoon and got squeezed between a Pennsy tank car and an AT&SF gondola, Martin sort of wondered why the Brotherhood didn't sing the song at his funeral. As an adult, Martin couldn't keep away from the railroads. Wherever he traveled, he rode the rods. He'd rather hop a freight heading north in sub-zero weather than lift his thumb to hitch a ride with a Cadillac headed for Florida. Whenever he managed to get hold of a can of Sterno, he'd sit there under a nice warm culvert, think about the old days, and often as not he'd hum the song about that hell-bound train. That was the train the drunks and the sinners rode, the gambling men and the grifters, the big-time spenders, the skirt chasers, and all the jolly crew. It would be really fine to take a trip in such good company, but Martin didn't like to think of what happened when that train finally pulled into the depot way down yonder. He didn't figure on spending eternity stoking the boilers in hell, without even a company union to protect him. One evening, Martin trudged along, humming Daddy's song, waiting for a rattler to pull out of the junction behind him. He'd have to catch it. There was nothing else for him to do. But the first train to come along came from the other direction, roaring toward him along the track from the south. Martin peered ahead, but his eyes couldn't match his ears, and so far all he could recognize was the sound. It was a train, though he felt the steel shuddering and singing underneath his feet. And yet, how could it be? The next station south was Nina Menasha, and there was nothing due out of there for hours. The clouds were thick overhead, and the field mists rolled like a cold fog in a November midnight. Even so, Martin should have been able to see the headlight as the train rushed on, but there was only the whistle screaming out of the black throat of the night. Martin could recognize the equipment of just about any locomotive ever built, but he'd never heard a whistle that sounded like this one. It wasn't signaling. It was screaming like a lost soul. He stepped to one side, for the train was almost on top of him now, and suddenly there it was, looming along the tracks and grinding to a stop in less time than he'd believed possible. The wheels hadn't been oiled because they screamed too, screamed like the damned. But the train slid to a halt, and the screams died away into a series of low, groaning sounds, and Martin looked up and saw that this was a passenger train. It was big and black, without a single light shining in the engine cab or any of the long string of cars. Martin couldn't read any lettering on the sides, but he was pretty sure that this train didn't belong on the Northwestern Road. He was even more sure when he saw the man clamber down out of the forward car. There was something wrong about the way he walked, as though one of his feet dragged, and about the lantern he carried. The lantern was dark, and the man held it up to his mouth and blew. And instantly it glowed red. You don't have to be a member of the Railway Brotherhood to know that this is a mighty peculiar way of lighting a lantern. As the figure approached, Martin recognized the conductor's cap perched on his head, and this made him feel a little better for a moment, until he noticed that it was worn a bit too high, as though there might be something sticking up on the forehead underneath it. Still, Martin knew his manners, and when the man smiled at him, he said, "Good evening, Mr. Conductor." "Good evening, Martin." "How did you know my name?" The man shrugged. "How did you know I was the conductor?" "You are, aren't you?" "To you, yes. Although other people in other walks of life may recognize me in different roles. For instance, you ought to see what I look like to the folks out in Hollywood." "I travel a great deal." "What brings you here?" Martin asked. "Why, to offer you a ride, of course." "I'm not sure I'd care to ride your train, sir," Martin said, "considering where I'm likely to end up." "Ah, yes, the old argument. I suppose you'd prefer some sort of bargain, is that it?" "Exactly." "Well, I'm afraid I'm all through with that sort of thing. There's no shortage of prospective passengers anymore. Why should I offer you any special inducements?" "You must want me, or else you wouldn't have bothered to go out of your way to find me." There you have a point. Pride was always my besetting weakness, I admit, and somehow I'd hate to lose you to the competition after thinking of you as my own all these years. Yes, I'm prepared to deal with you on your own terms, if you insist. The terms? Standard proposition. Anything you want. Ah. But I warn you in advance, Martin, there'll be no tricks. I'll grant you any wish you can name, but in return you must promise to ride the train when the time comes. Suppose it never comes. It will. Suppose I've got the kind of wish that'll keep me off forever. There is no such wish. Don't be too sure. Let me worry about that. No matter what you have in mind, I warn you that I'll collect in the end, and there'll be none of this last-minute hocus-pocus either. No last-hour repentances, no blonde Fräuleins or fancy lawyers showing up to get you off. I offer a clean deal. That is to say, you'll get what you want, and I'll get what I want. I've heard you trick people. They say you're worse than a used car salesman. Now, wait a minute. I apologize. But it is supposed to be a fact that you can't be trusted. I admit it. On the other hand, you seem to think you have found a way out. A surefire proposition. Surefire. Very funny. But we waste valuable time, Martin. Let's get down to cases. What do you want from me? I want to be able to stop time. Right now? No. Not yet. And not for everybody.
I realize that would be impossible, of course, but I want to be able to stop time for myself. Just once, in the future, whenever I get to a point where I know I'm happy and contented, that's where I'd like to stop. So I can just keep on being happy forever.
That's quite a proposition. I've got to admit I've never heard anything just like it before, and believe me, I've listened to some real Lulus in my day. You've really been thinking about this, haven't you?
For years. What do you say?
It's not impossible in terms of your own subjective time sense. Yes, I think it could be arranged.
But I mean to really stop. Not for me just to imagine it.
I understand. It can be done.
Then you'll agree?
Why not? I promised you, didn't I? Give me your hand.
Will it hurt very much? I mean, I don't like the sight of blood.
Nonsense. You've been listening to a lot of poppycock. We already have made our bargain, my boy. I merely intend to put something into your hand. The ways and means of fulfilling your wish. After all, there's no telling at just what moment you may decide to exercise the agreement, and I can't drop everything and come running. So it's better if you can regulate matters for yourself.
You're gonna give me a time stopper?
That's the general idea. As soon as I can decide what would be practical.
Ah, the very thing.
Here, take my watch. He pulled it out of his vest pocket, a railroad watch in his silver case. He opened the back and made a delicate adjustment. Martin tried to see just exactly what he was doing, but the fingers moved in a blinding blur. There we are. It's all set now. When you finally decide where you'd like to call a halt, merely turn the stem in reverse and unwind the watch until it stops. When it stops, time stops. For you. Simple enough. And the conductor dropped the watch into Martin's hand. The young man closed his fingers tightly around the case.
That's all there is to it, eh?
Absolutely. But remember, you can stop the watch only once. So you better make sure that you're satisfied with the moment you choose to prolong. I caution you in all fairness, make very certain of your choice.
I will. And since you've been so fair about it, I'll be fair too. There's one thing you seem to have forgotten. It doesn't really matter what moment I choose, because once I stop time for myself, that means I stay where I am forever. I'll never have to get older. And if I don't get any older, I'll never die. And if I never die, then I'll never have to take a ride on your train.
The conductor turned away. His shoulders shook convulsively, and he may have been crying.
And you said I was worse than a used car salesman.
Then he wandered off into the fog, and the train whistle gave an impatient shriek. All at once, it was moving swiftly down the track, rumbling, out of sight, in the darkness. Martin stood there, blinking down at the silver watch in his hand. If it wasn't that he could actually see it and feel it there, and if he couldn't smell that particular odor, he might have thought he'd imagined the whole thing from start to finish, train, conductor, bargain, and all. But he had the watch, and he could recognize the scent left by the train as it departed, even though there aren't many locomotives around that use sulfur and brimstone as fuel. And he had no doubts about his bargain. That's what came of thinking things through to a logical conclusion. Some fools would have settled for wealth or power or Kim Novak. Daddy might have sold out for a fifth of whiskey. Martin knew that he'd made a better deal. Better? It was foolproof. All he needed to do now was choose his moment. He put the watch in his pocket and started back down the railroad track. He hadn't really had a destination in mind before, but he did now. He was going to find a moment of happiness. Martin becomes the standard bum, a panhandler, and he enjoys that life. Then he wants to improve himself with a job, a car, girls, then a nice girl he marries, and all the while he considers his watch. Is this the moment? Is this the moment? Getting married turned out to be just the beginning. Sure, it was wonderful, but his wife Lillian told him how much better things would be if they could move into a new place and fix it up. Martin wanted decent furniture, a TV set, a nice car. So he started taking night courses and got a promotion to the front office. With the baby coming, he wanted to stick around and see his son arrive. When it came, he realized he'd have to wait until it got a little older, started to walk and talk and develop a personality of its own. About this time, the company sent him out on the road as a troubleshooter on some of those other jobs, and now he was eating at those good hotels, living high on the hog and the expense account. More than once he was tempted to unwind his watch. This was the good life. Of course, it would be even better if he just didn't have to work. Sooner or later, if he could cut in on one of the company deals, he could make a pile and retire. Then everything would be ideal. It happened, but it took time. Martin's son was going to high school before he really got up there into the chips. Martin got a strong hunch that it was now or never, because he wasn't exactly a kid anymore. But right about then he met Sherry Westcott, and she didn't seem to think he was middle-aged at all, in spite of the way he was losing hair and adding stomach. She taught him that a toupee could cover the bald spot, and a cummerbund could cover the pot gut. In fact, she taught him quite a lot, and he so enjoyed learning that he actually took out his watch and prepared to unwind it. Unfortunately, he chose the very moment that the private detectives broke down the door of the hotel room, and then there was a long stretch of time when Martin was so busy fighting the divorce action that he couldn't honestly say he was enjoying any given moment. When he made the final settlement with Lil, he was broke again, and Sherry didn't seem to think he was so young after all. So, he squared his shoulders and went back to work. Martin climbs back to the top, but he finds it takes twice as long, and it's also very lonely now that he's aging rapidly. He tries to meet new friends while traveling the world, but his health collapses from drinking and partying to keep up with the younger crowd. And Martin isn't fooled by the doctors who are caring for him. He's had it. That doesn't stop him from trying one last time to make good on his long-ago bargain. Because he could fool them. He still had the watch. He found it in his coat when he put on his clothes and sneaked out of the hospital. He didn't have to die. He could cheat death with a single gesture, and he intended to do it as a free man out there under a free sky. That was the real secret of happiness. He understood it now. Not even friendship meant as much as freedom. This was the best thing of all, to be free of friends or family, the furies of the flesh. Martin walked slowly beside the embankment, under the night sky. Come to think of it, he was just about where he'd started so many years ago, but the moment was good. Good enough to prolong forever. Once a bum, always a bum. He smiled as he thought about it, and then the smile twisted sharply, and suddenly, like the pain twisting sharply and suddenly, in his chest, the world began to spin, and he fell down on the side of the embankment. couldn't see very well, but he was still conscious and he knew what had happened. Another stroke. A bad one. Maybe this was it. Except that he wouldn't be a fool any longer. He wouldn't wait to see what was still around the corner. Right now was his chance to use his power and save his life, and he was going to do it. He could still move. Nothing would stop him. He groped in his pocket and pulled out the old silver watch, fumbling with the stem. A few twists and he'd cheat death. He'd never have to ride that hellbound train. He could go on forever. Forever. Martin had never really considered the word before. To go on forever. But how? Did he want to go on forever like this, a sick old man lying helplessly here in the grass? No. No. He couldn't do it. And suddenly, he wanted very much to cry because he knew that somewhere along the line, he'd outsmarted himself. And now it was too late. His eyes dimmed. There was a roaring in his ears. He recognized the roaring, of course, and he wasn't at all surprised to see the train come rushing out of the fog up there on the embankment. He wasn't surprised when it stopped either, or when the conductor climbed off and walked slowly toward him. The conductor hadn't changed a bit. "Hello, Martin." "All aboard."
I know, but you'll have to carry me. I can't walk. I'm not even really talking anymore, am I?"
"Yes, you are. I can hear you fine, and you can walk, too." The conductor leaned down and placed his hand on Martin's chest. There was a moment of icy numbness, and then, sure enough, Martin could walk, after all. He got up and followed the conductor along the slope, moving to the side of the train. "In here?" "No, the next car. I guess you're entitled to ride Pullman. After all, you're quite a successful man. You've tasted the joys of wealth and position and prestige. You've known the pleasures of marriage and fatherhood. You've sampled the delights of dining and drinking and debauchery, too, and you traveled high, wide, and handsome. So, let's not have any last-minute recriminations."
"All right. I can't blame you for my mistakes. On the other hand, you can't take credit for what happened either. I worked for everything I got. I did it all on my own. I didn't even need your watch."
"So you didn't. But, would you mind giving it back to me now?"
"Need it for the next sucker, eh?"
"Perhaps." Something about the way he said it made Martin look up. He tried to see the conductor's eyes, but the brim of the cap cast a shadow. So Martin looked down at the watch instead.
"Tell me something. If I give you the watch, what'll you do with it?"
"Why, throw it into the ditch. That's all I'll do with it."
Gimme. What if somebody comes along and finds it, and twists the stem backward and stops time?"
"Nobody would do that, even if they knew."
"You mean it was all a trick? This is only an ordinary cheap watch?"
"I didn't say that. I only said that no one has ever twisted the stem backward. They've all been like you, Martin, looking ahead to find that perfect happiness, waiting for the moment that never comes." Martin sighed and shook his head.
"You cheated me after all."
"You cheated yourself, Martin, and now
you're gonna ride that hellbound train."
He pushed Martin up the steps and into the car ahead. As he entered, the train began to move and the whistle screamed. and Martin stood there in the swaying Pullman gazing down the aisle at the other passengers. He could see them sitting there, and somehow it didn't seem strange at all. Here they were, the drunks and the sinners, the gambling men and the grifters, the big-time spenders, the skirt chasers, and all the jolly crew. They knew where they were going, of course, but they didn't seem to give a damn. The blinds were drawn on the windows, yet it was light inside, and they were all living it up, singing and passing the bottle and roaring with laughter, throwing the dice and telling their jokes and bragging their big brags, just the way Daddy used to sing about them in the old song. Mighty nice traveling companions. Why, I've never seen such a pleasant bunch of people. I mean, they seem to be really enjoying themselves. I'm afraid things won't be quite so jazzy when we pull into that depot way down yonder. Now, before you sit down, if you'll just give me that watch. A bargain's a bargain. A bargain's a bargain. I agreed to ride your train if I could stop time when I found the right moment of happiness, and I think I'm about as happy right here as I've ever been. Very slowly, Martin took hold of the silver watch stem. No! No! But the watch stem turned. Do you realize what you've done? Now we'll never reach the depot. We'll just go on riding, all of us, forever. I know, said Martin. But the fun is in the trip, not in the destination. You taught me that. And I'm looking forward to a wonderful trip. Look, maybe I can even help. If you was to find me another one of those caps now, and let me keep this watch. And that's the way it finally worked out. Wearing his cap and carrying his battered old silver watch, there's no happier person in or out of this world now and forever than Martin. Martin, the new brakeman on that hell-bound train.